We pose the universal information gap. Why are the financial networks blinding us with paper stock market highs, while the oldest, most primal economic metric in human history, how much food 1 ounce of real money can buy, is flashing a code red warning for anyone producing their own food? We introduce the shadow mystery. This specific ratio has not just predicted the collapse of every major fiat currency. Its current violent divergence is exposing a coordinated move by the ultra-wealthy to hoard hard agricultural assets, intentionally leaving the independent homesteader and rancher exposed to a catastrophic squeeze on feed and fertilizer. Dollar prices on feed, fertilizer, and grain paint a comforting picture. Until you look closer. Each year, the numbers on invoices climb, yet the real weight behind those dollars keeps shrinking. For anyone raising livestock or growing crops, the pain shows up in 1,000 ways. A feed bill that buys less, a fertilizer order that covers fewer acres, a harvest check that feels lighter than last season's, even if the yield was strong. The so-called price is just a number, one measured with a yardstick that keeps getting shorter. Since the 1970s, the Consumer Price Index has shown the dollar losing more than 85% of its purchasing power. A ton of corn or a barrel of diesel may look affordable on paper, but the paper itself is what is eroding. This is the fiat feed illusion. Producers are paid in a currency that melts faster than the feed in a trough. What matters is not the dollar price, it is how much real value you can store, trade, or feed to your animals. When the yardstick keeps shrinking, every transaction becomes a gamble against time. 1 ounce of gold, 400 bushels of corn. That is the measuring stick at the heart of this story, a ratio that has held its ground through a century of storms, panics, and policy swings. The gold-to-corn ratio is simple math. Take the price of gold per ounce, divide it by the price of corn per bushel, and you get a number that tells you how much real food 1 ounce of stored human labor can buy. For decades, that number hovered around 400. Not every year, not every crisis, but as a long-run average, it is the line in the sand. This is not just a chart for economists, it is a survival gauge. When the ratio swings wildly, when gold buys far more or far less corn than that 400 bushel baseline, it signals that something is out of balance. Either money is being debased or the food system is under threat. By tracking this ratio, producers can see through the fog of shrinking dollars and shifting prices. It is a tool to measure true value, the calories, the energy, the feed that keeps animals and people alive, measured against the ultimate base money, physical gold. Gold and corn form the two pillars holding up the world of real value. On one side, gold is more than a shiny metal. It is the memory of sweat, risk, and years of work stored in a single coin. Every ounce is a record of labor that cannot be faked or printed. On the other side, corn is pure energy captured from the sun and packed into every bushel. It is the calories that keep livestock moving, families fed, and communities alive. For independent producers, these are not just market abstractions. Gold is the hedge against tomorrow's uncertainty, and corn is tonight's supper and next season's hope. When you measure one against the other, you are not just crunching numbers, you are weighing the past efforts of millions, miners, farmers, and ranchers against the living pulse of the land. If either pillar cracks, the whole balance tips. When gold surges far ahead of corn, it means stored labor is outrunning the food energy that keeps life going. When corn grows scarce against gold, survival itself feels more expensive. The ratio is not just a chart, it is a reflection of real people's struggle to hold on to what matters. On the plains and in the heartland towns of the 1930s, the numbers on corn checks shrank until they barely covered the ink on the page. Corn fetched 30 cents a bushel, sometimes less. Debts on land and seed stayed fixed in dollars that no longer matched the sweat it took to produce a crop. Farmers watched gold remain steady at $20.67 an ounce until the government revalued it to $35 an ounce in 1934, and corn kept falling, so the ratio between them soared to unheard-of levels. A historian flips through foreclosure notices from 1933, each one a family forced off the land not by drought alone, but by a system that measured their work in a currency losing its anchor. The county courthouse filled with auctions, land, livestock, machinery, all going cheap to buyers who held hard money. For every 400 bushels that once matched an ounce of gold, now it took 1,000 bushels. Corn became nearly worthless on paper, but the debt remained as heavy as ever. A farmer's diary from Iowa tells of neighbors loading their lives onto wagons, heading west or into town, leaving behind fields that had fed generations. The gold-to-corn ratio was screaming the warning. When the price of food collapses against the price of money, survival slips out of reach for those without gold in their pockets. The land changed hands not because it failed to produce, but because the yardstick changed. Deflation didn't just empty wallets, it emptied the Midwest, one auction at a time. August 1971. The president appears on television and closes the gold window, breaking the last tie between the dollar and gold. Overnight, the world's measuring stick for value starts to float. The dollar is now just paper, untethered, and the gold-to-corn ratio begins to swing wildly. Producers watch as inflation pours into every corner of the economy. By 1973, oil prices quadrupled after the OPEC embargo. Diesel, fertilizer, and feed bills double or triple. Corn prices spike briefly, but every input cost surges even faster. Synthetic fertilizer, once cheap thanks to abundant natural gas, becomes a luxury. The cost to grow a bushel of corn rises 150% through the decade, while the price received cannot keep up. A rancher in Nebraska remembers the sting. We sold calves for more dollars, but bought less feed, less fuel, less of everything. The numbers on the check were bigger, but the feed truck was lighter. The gold-to-corn ratio collapses below 200. Gold rockets from $35 an ounce to over $200 by 1978. Then $850 by 1980, while corn struggles to break $3 a bushel. The yardstick is moving again, but now it is shrinking in the producer's hands. The ratio is no longer screaming about deflation, it is warning of a different trap. Paper money melts, and the cost of survival rises faster than the price of food. Farmers and ranchers take to the highways, driving tractors to state capitals and Washington, demanding relief. The gold-to-corn seismograph is still flashing red, but the danger is now inflation, not collapse. The lesson of the 1970s, when energy shocks hit and the dollar floats, is this: the ground shifts beneath every farm and ranch. September 2008. The phones on the Chicago trading floor ring off the hook as Lehman Brothers collapses. Margin calls hit every corner of the market, forcing traders to dump anything they can sell: corn, soybeans, cattle, even oil. CME open interest in corn futures peaks at over 1.4 million contracts, while prices swing from $7.50 a bushel in June to $3.50 by December. The gold market tells a different story. As panic spreads, investors scramble for safety, driving gold from $800 to over $1,000 an ounce in weeks. The gold-to-corn ratio spikes, screaming that the plumbing beneath the food system is breaking. A commodities trader, face drawn from sleepless nights, describes the chaos. We weren't trading collateral. When the banks froze, everything had to be liquidated. Funds unwind billions in paper contracts, crushing grain prices far below what any farmer can produce for. The ratio, usually anchored near 400, swings wildly, 600, then 800, then back down as the dust settles. But the damage is done. Feed bills don't drop as fast as futures. Elevators and co-ops tighten credit. Producers watch their margins vanish, not from drought or disease, but from a financial storm no crop insurance can cover. In the aftermath, the news blames greedy banks and broken mortgages, but the gold-to-corn ratio had already flashed its warning. When the system's gears lock up, paper markets dictate the price of real food. The lesson lands hard. In a leveraged world, one margin call can turn a harvest into a liability overnight. An elevator operator leans on the scale and shakes his head. On paper, corn is cheap, he says, but nobody is getting rich. The numbers back him up. USDA yield charts show record harvests, with national averages pushing past 180 bushels per acre, double what a field gave up in the 1970s. The bins are full, the trucks keep rolling, and yet the price per bushel barely budges. This is not just a story of abundance. It is a story of masking the real cost of feed and food hidden behind a wall of subsidies, insurance payouts, and government payment programs that prop up the illusion of cheap grain. Each year, billions flow from Washington to corn country, smoothing out the bumps when prices dip or weather turns sour. Crop insurance covers the downside. Direct payments fill the gaps. Ethanol mandates and export credits push demand on spreadsheets, even when the market itself is gasping for air. The result is a price that looks stable, even generous, while the ground truth says otherwise. High yields, turbocharged by synthetic fertilizer and genetically engineered seed, create a flood of supply. But the input bills, diesel, ammonia, herbicide, climb just as fast, eating away at every gain. In the elevator office, receipts pile up. The operator points to a season's worth of tickets and says, "You would think with this much corn moving through, the math would work. But the more we grow, the more it costs to keep up." The so-called surplus is a mirage built on borrowed energy and taxpayer dollars. On the board, the price per bushel is a number set by traders 1,000 miles away, not by the sweat and sun that filled the bin. The gold-to-corn ratio, which should track the real cost of calories and labor, is being muffled by policy and chemistry. The chart is not just screaming, it is being gagged. The true price of survival is hidden, and the warning signs are buried beneath a mountain of paperwork and yield records. Inside every bushel of corn, there is more than sunlight and rain. There is a hidden bill for natural gas. Modern corn is grown on a foundation of synthetic nitrogen, pulled from the air by the Haber-Bosch process, but only made possible by burning vast quantities of methane. A fertilizer plant engineer walks the catwalk above a maze of pipes and tanks, watching gauges that track gas flow by the second. For every ton of ammonia they produce, nearly 90% of the cost comes from natural gas. When the price of gas spikes, the cost of fertilizer jumps with it, and the price to grow a bushel of corn can double before a single seed hits the ground. Charts from the International Fertilizer Association show ammonia prices rising in lockstep with global gas shocks. In 2022, as European gas markets exploded, ammonia prices tripled in less than a year. Plants across the Midwest and Europe idled or slowed production, unable to compete with soaring input costs. The engineer points to a printout. Last season, gas made up $800 of the $900 cost to produce a ton of ammonia. When gas is cheap, fertilizer flows and yields climb. When it is not, the entire food chain feels the squeeze, from grain elevators to feedlots to kitchen tables. This is not a theoretical risk. The link between gas and nitrogen means that every energy crisis becomes a food crisis in waiting. The so-called cheap corn on the board is an artifact of borrowed energy, not a reflection of true abundance. When the gas stops flowing or the price goes vertical, the cost of survival climbs with it. The gold-to-corn ratio may look stable on the chart, but underneath, the physical cost of growing calories is tied to a volatile, global energy market. The warning is not just in the numbers, it is in the pipes, the invoices, and the ground itself. A commodities market analyst sits in front of two screens. One tracks open interest on the Chicago Board of Trade, the other shows warehouse stock reports. The numbers rarely match. On any given day, the Chicago Board of Trade might show 1.5 million active corn futures contracts, each representing 5,000 bushels. That is a claim on 7.5 billion bushels, while total deliverable stocks in approved warehouses hover around 500 million. For every physical bushel in the system, more than 10 paper promises exist. Gold is even more extreme. COMEX open interest in gold futures recently topped 550,000 contracts, each worth 100 ounces. That is 55 million ounces on the books, while registered deliverable gold in warehouses sits below 8 million ounces. The ratio is stark, more than 6 paper claims for every ounce that can actually be delivered. The analyst scrolls through CFTC Commitment of Traders reports. Speculative funds and managed money now hold nearly half of all open positions in both corn and gold, trading contracts that almost never result in physical delivery. Less than 2% of contracts ever see a real bushel or ounce move from warehouse to buyer. The rest are settled in cash, with prices set by traders who may never set foot on a farm or in a grain elevator. The contracts-to-stock ratio, a forensic metric, has become a warning sign of its own. In February 2026, gold's ratio hit 24-1, corn's stood at 10-1. Historical averages were half that. When paper claims swamp physical supply, price discovery becomes a hall of mirrors. This is the shadow mystery at the heart of modern commodity markets. The price on the board is not just a reflection of supply and demand, it is the outcome of a contest between physical producers and financial speculators. Hedge funds can sell more corn or gold on paper in a day than all the elevators or vaults could ever deliver in a year. For independent producers, this gap is more than an academic curiosity. It means the feed bill, the harvest check, and the value of stored grain are all at the mercy of a market where paper outweighs the physical by an order of magnitude. The toolkit is simple. Track open interest, compare it to deliverable stocks, and watch the ratio. When the numbers diverge, the warning lights flash. The chart is not just screaming, it is being drowned out by the noise of synthetic trades. Central banks have been quietly stacking gold at a pace not seen since the end of the Bretton Woods era. In 2022 alone, official net purchases topped 1,000 metric tons, an amount that dwarfs the annual production of most gold mining nations. China, Russia, and India lead the pack, each adding to their reserves while keeping much of their buying off the books. The World Gold Council reports that since 2018, annual central bank purchases have consistently run above 650 tons, but the 2022 surge broke every modern record. This is not a symbolic gesture. When the world's biggest monetary authorities trade dollars and government bonds for physical bullion, it is a signal that the old monetary order is cracking. A monetary analyst reviews the latest central bank disclosures. The numbers show a coordinated flight from paper assets into hard reserves. China's official gold holdings now exceed 2,200 tons, but analysts estimate the true figure could be double that, hidden in sovereign wealth funds or unreported vaults. Russia's central bank has more than 2,300 tons, built up steadily since 2008. India, Turkey, and smaller nations have followed suit, each converting trade surpluses and export earnings into bars and coins that cannot be frozen or devalued by foreign powers. This gold rush is not about tradition or nostalgia. It is a hedge against the same forces that threaten independent producers, currency debasement, financial instability, and the risk that paper promises will not be honored. When official buyers are outbidding private investors for physical gold, it is a sign that the world's monetary stewards no longer trust the yardsticks they once set. The demand is real, the accumulation is deliberate, and the message is clear. When the game changes, those holding hard assets make the rules. A patchwork of deed records tells a story that rarely makes the headlines. Over the past decade, vast tracts of America's farmland have quietly changed hands, not to neighboring families or retiring farmers, but to private investment vehicles, trusts, and billionaires. Among them, Bill Gates stands out. Through Cascade Investment, Gates has amassed around 270,000 acres across at least 18 states, making him the largest private farmland owner in the United States. The scale is staggering, with parcels in Louisiana, Arkansas, Nebraska, and beyond stitched together through a web of shell companies and holding entities. A land ownership journalist pores over county records, tracing transactions that often list limited liability companies instead of names. Each purchase is a bet on the future of food, water, and soil. It is not just Gates. Institutional investors, pension funds, and hedge funds have poured billions into farmland, drawn by its steady yields and the promise of inflation protection. In some counties, a single fund controls thousands of acres, outbidding local producers and driving up land prices beyond the reach of most families. For independent farmers, the implications are clear. Land is no longer just a place to grow a crop or graze a herd. It is an asset class, a hedge against the same currency erosion that warps the gold-to-corn ratio. Control of the ground means control of the food system. As more acres slip into distant hands, the link between those who work the land and those who own it grows thinner. The stakes are measured not in bushels or ounces, but in who gets to decide what and who the land feeds. Cargo ships loaded with grain no longer always settle their accounts in dollars. In the past 3 years, a wave of new contracts has shifted major grain and fertilizer shipments out of the dollar system and into rubles, renminbi, and other local currencies. In 2023, Russia and China signed a deal to trade wheat and corn directly in yuan and rubles, bypassing New York and London entirely. India has begun settling fertilizer imports from Russia in rupees. Even Brazil and Argentina have tested grain swaps using the Chinese yuan. A trade expert, sleeves rolled and eyes on the latest shipping manifests, explains the new math. If you are not using dollars, you are not exposed to the same shocks, but you are also not protected by the old safety nets. As each region lines up its own currency block, the price of corn, wheat, and fertilizer fractures across borders. A bushel sold in Shanghai or Istanbul no longer tracks the Chicago Board of Trade, not when the invoice settles in a currency that can swing 10% in a month. This shift is not just an accounting trick. When the world's breadbasket stop trusting the dollar, the old rules of trade and supply start to break down. Regional scarcity can hit overnight as a currency swing or a new sanction locks up grain in a distant port. The gold-to-corn ratio, once a global signal, now flashes different warnings in every currency zone. For producers, the risk is clear. When the world splits into rival money systems, the cost of survival can double before the next harvest. The gold-to-corn ratio is not just a chart, it is a pressure gauge that can only stay in the red so long before something gives. In January 2025, the ratio hit a new all-time high, far above the century average of 400 bushels per ounce. For agricultural economist Dr. Sarah Kim, that number is not an abstraction. She calls it a fuse. She says, when the ratio stretches this far, history says it snaps back. The only question is how. Mean reversion is the law of the land in commodity cycles. When the ratio shoots to an extreme, it does not stay there. Either gold falls or corn and feed prices rocket higher to close the gap. There is no third option. Looking back, every time the ratio broke from its long-run mean, whether in the deflation of the 1930s or the inflation storms of the 1970s, the snapback was violent. In the 1930s, corn was crushed and livelihoods were lost. In the 1970s, input costs exploded and food prices doubled. The chart does not forgive. It demands balance. Today, the ratio's record high is a warning. Gold sits at unprecedented levels, but corn on paper remains cheap. The numbers suggest abundance, but the foundation is brittle, built on borrowed energy, synthetic fertilizer, and paper contracts that outnumber real bushels 10 to 1. Dr. Kim points to the binary outcome. Either gold collapses, which history rarely favors, or food and feed prices surge. That is ageflation. When it hits, it is not just a headline. It is a shock that runs from the trading floor to the feedlot, from the elevator to the kitchen table. Agflation is more than a buzzword. It is the silent tax that strikes when the price of survival outpaces the price of money. The data shows that when the ratio reverts, the move is sudden. Corn and feed can double or triple in months, while input costs, seed, fertilizer, and diesel, rise even faster. Producers caught flat-footed are forced to liquidate herds, cut acres, or borrow at punishing rates. For those who see the warning, there is still time to prepare, but the window is closing fast. The chart is screaming, and the risk is now measured in weeks and months, not years. On the edge of a field, a regenerative farmer runs his hand along the smooth bark of a young mulberry tree. He is not thinking about the price on the board in Chicago or the latest invoice from the fertilizer dealer. His focus is on the leaves, deep green, packed with protein, ready to feed a flock of sheep even when the feed store is empty or the dollar is falling apart. Mulberry is not just a shade tree, it is a perennial feed reserve. Dried or fresh, its leaves carry a crude protein content that rivals alfalfa, often 15 to 28%. In drought, during price spikes, or when trucks stop rolling, these trees keep livestock moving. He is not alone. Across the fence line, rows of Tagasaste, sometimes called tree lucerne, anchor the hillside. Tagasaste fixes nitrogen right into the soil, pulling 45 to 90 kilograms per hectare each year out of thin air, and its foliage tests at 18 to 30% protein. These are not just numbers, they are the difference between buying another ton of soybean meal at a price set by global traders or walking out and cutting feed with a machete. Every pound of protein grown on the farm is a pound that does not have to be bought with melting dollars. Cover crops, deep-rooted clovers, vetch, and rye spread across the pasture after the main harvest. Their roots break up compacted soil, mine minerals from below, and fix even more nitrogen, building fertility without a single drop of synthetic input. Over a season, a well-managed stand can add the equivalent of 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That is a feed bill slashed, a fertilizer order canceled, a little more independence from the gas pipeline, and the global price of ammonia. Rotational grazing, once dismissed as old-fashioned, is now a shield against input shocks. Livestock move across small paddocks, never overgrazing, always leaving behind a patchwork of manure and trampled stems. The result is soil organic matter climbs, water holds longer in a drought, and the pasture rebounds faster. Compost piles steam behind the barn, cycling waste into feed for the next crop. Every layer of biological fertility, trees, legumes, compost, and managed grazing, cuts the need for purchased feed and fertilizer. It is not theory, it is a living defense system. The first line of resilience is not in a vault or a spreadsheet. It is rooted in the ground, growing every day, and ready when the chart starts screaming. A storage specialist sweeps aside a tarp to reveal bins lined with clean, dry grain. He checks a meter. Moisture reads 13.5%. Anything above 14% invites mold, rot, and loss. For him, every bushel kept below that threshold is more than food. It is a hedge against the next price shock, a reserve that holds value when the board price turns into a mirage. Grain, hay, and feed are not just inventory, they are a form of physical wealth, immune to the sudden swings of the dollar and the whims of a futures market. In the barn, bales are stacked high, each one labeled by cut and date, rotated so nothing spoils. Deep pantries hold not just canned goods, but feed rations, seed, salt, and mineral blocks, enough to outlast a supply chain freeze or a spike in input costs. Across the county line, a community organizer opens a worn ledger. It is not a bank statement, but a record of barter, eggs for diesel, hay for labor, a side of beef for a load of gravel. Each line is settled in kind, not in dollars. The rules are simple: track what is given, what is received, and keep the scales balanced. When money fails or disappears, trust and memory are the currency. In some towns, these ledgers have kept food moving and work done through power outages, market crashes, and even pandemics. A 30-day plan hangs on the wall. Inventory all feed and seed, test grain moisture, top off fuel, and check with neighbors about what each can spare or trade. The organizer calls it a living safety net. No one stands alone when the yardstick melts. The roadmap is clear. Store what you can control. Grain dry and safe, hay covered, water clean. Build a ledger, even if it is just a notebook, and start with a single trade. Reach out to neighbors, not just for emergencies, but for routine swaps that build trust. In a world where the chart screams warning and the price of survival can double in a season, these steps are not theory. They are the difference between getting squeezed and staying afloat. The next shock may come in weeks, not years, but with storage, barter, and a plan, resilience is built one bin, one bale, and one handshake at a time. Right now, the gold to corn ratio is screaming at levels never seen before, over 700 to 1, far above its century-long 400 to 1 mean. Billionaires and central banks are hoarding gold and land, while futures markets distort the price of real feed. For independent producers, this is not theory, it is a warning. Fiat is a moving yardstick, but stored labor and congealed sunlight never lie. The next reset will not be televised. It will be lived, acre by acre, bushel by bushel.